How about that, folks? So we need to think about IoT security and privacy end to end. Thank you, Arun. Thank you to the panelists for that very insightful conversation. And don't forget, you got to secure your fish tanks and your pet trackers as well, because those are important. We're going to pivot slightly now. We're going to go from security back to private mobile networks. And our next speaker, Luke Pearce, who from CCS Insights, he is the senior analyst incubation projects. He's going to take us through of all the trends, the challenges, and opportunities within, what we need to do on the private mobile networks. Welcome, Luke. Good to have
Thanks
you with
much.
us.
Cheers. Yeah, thank you very much. Good to be here amongst this great caliber of speakers and companies.
Fantastic. So I believe, sir, you have a presentation to take us through. So I would leave it up to you to guide us through private mobile networks.
Thanks very much, Nasia. Yeah, and I think we've got a little bit of space for questions at the end as well. So please, if you do have any questions during the presentation, of course, please pop them in the chat and we'll be able to address some of those at the end as well. I'll try and leave a bit of time to address those. So yeah, thanks very much. Great to be here. My name's Luke Pearce. I'm an analyst at CCS Insight. And today, as Nasia highlighted, we're going to be talking a bit about private mobile networks. So today is very much focused on IoT, and we've heard lots of interesting insights already throughout today around some of the uses and case studies for IoT specifically. And underpinning a lot of IoT and enabling what we can do with it is the connectivity pillar of mobile connectivity, particularly exciting when we get to 5G connectivity where we are today. So 5G being delivered to kind of enterprises exclusively rather than a public network really helps to unlock much greater control and flexibility for that on-site connectivity and extend the capabilities of what we can do on-site with private networks rather than traditional kind of Wi-Fi or cable connections. So this presentation really focuses more on the state of the private mobile network market across the world, a global view, and how we expect it to develop going forward as well, giving rise to more enterprises and organizations able to use mobile connectivity to do lots of the kind of IoT off the back of that and some of what we've heard about today. So that's kind of the basis of the presentation today. So a bit about CCS Insight, in case some of you may not know, we're a UK-based analyst firm and consultancy service. We have a long history focused exclusively on the telecoms industry. We've been around kind of 25 to 30 years now. We have a predictions event, which you can see there on the left. Our predictions event is where we highlight some technology predictions for the next year and beyond. So that's coming up in a couple of months. So a little plug for that. But we're a client base. We operate on a subscription model. We've got all of the top 10 companies in the Fortune 500 kind of downloading our insights for technology. And some of our analysts are known for their influence and represent some of the most recognized faces and voices in the industry, and particularly within mobile as well. So some of the insights we'll be drawing upon in the presentation today draws across a number of our different products and services. We have a mobile infrastructure service suite, and that kind of offers insights into what's happening within mobile infrastructure and 5G generally. We also have a dedicated private network suite of services where we've got some holistic market analysis looking at forecasts and where the market's going and some trends, but also a quarterly tracking service as well, where we break down what's happening quarter by quarter. And last but not least, we have an IT infrastructure and app delivery survey. So that's a kind of number of survey pieces we do throughout the year with service providers and IT infrastructure vendors to see what their priorities are and what they're thinking about. So that's just a few of the services that CCS Insight is drawing upon. So when we look at the kind of deployment models for private mobile networks, so just for a bit of context, we think of private mobile network market as having three kind of core deployment models as shown there on screen. On the left, we have the dedicated infrastructure piece, and that is where kind of either all of the network is deployed on premise on a campus, or as a standalone private network, so you've got the RAN and the core and all that isolated. An operator can be involved. It can be like a managed service through an operator or leasing spectrum, but it also doesn't need to be. So actually, in some cases, no mobile network operator is involved at all. As well, and that's the kind of main model that we'll be talking about today, and the one that's most dominant in the market. And more recently as well, with kind of the evolution of 5G standalone in some markets, we're seeing alternative models of private network deployment, utilizing the public infrastructure a little bit more as well. As you can see there on the right, that's kind of where private coverage is added to that public network. So we would call that a network slice, where you can kind of produce that to the private company from the public network, and more of a kind of private connection for a specific service and quality of experience. But a lot of that is only kind of in countries with 5G standalone architecture, and China is a big part of that at the moment. But we expect to see more mobile operators utilize their public network infrastructure to do some more private elements going forward as well, as they upgrade to that 5G core and 5G standalone capabilities. There are some variations, but these are the three kind of general models we consider. So a couple of numbers now. So this is how we're kind of quantifying and forecasting the market at a number of levels. The first is customers, and you might be surprised that that number is quite small. It's only around 1,540 customers in Q1 2023, and that's really just the number of unique enterprises or organizations around the world. It also includes local or regional authorities or an academic institution, but it is quite a small number, and that's the number of customers that have a private mobile network, a dedicated network on site at the moment. But that number is growing a lot. It's growing 64% year on year from the first quarter of 22, and we're still quite early on in adoption there. On top of that, we've got the number of networks or deployments. That's the actual number of sites where these networks can be found. We're starting to see customers potentially roll out some of these private networks across multiple locations. So that average number is rising now to 2.03, excluding some larger national deployments. But so we are starting to see that once the blueprint works on a certain site, and then gaining those costs and efficiencies with the private network and the applications that they're doing on it, they are beginning to roll that out across multiple locations and sites. And that's kind of really interesting at the moment, and where a lot of the value lies. On top of that as well, we've got the connections piece. So that's all the devices, the gateways, the IoT modules, the sensors, quite a large number built on top of those networks. And that is a huge part of the private network ecosystem as well. Although private 5G gets tooted about a lot, actually a lot of the market today is LTE or 4G. So that accounts for 67% of networks. Almost 2/3 of the current market is still 4G, and there are lots of 4G networks still being built across the world. So 4G is still a very big constant, despite the idea that private 5G is more penetrative. And of course, we've got the revenue piece as well. That's the number of kind of the billion infrastructure revenue for these networks. Costs quite a lot to deploy. So that initial capex is around, the average is 571,000. So it's not necessarily a market at the moment for the small and medium-sized enterprise. We're looking at quite large organizations that can afford to spend quite a large amount on that network infrastructure. Generally, I would say the median is more like kind of $250,000. But there are some very large sites and deployments that bring that average up a little bit. But we are seeing certain models like network as a service, which is helping to certain enterprises to get access to a 5G network and the applications on top of that without having to necessarily fork out that massive kind of capex cost originally as well. So that is certainly an interesting development we've seen, particularly from some of the cloud vendors in the US, like AWS. This slide is just looking at the kind of market growth over the last 5 years. So it is a relatively new market, really. It only started to have the first few customers back in 2018. So the curve is certainly steep from 2018. It's quite significant growth from then to now, despite that actual number being quite small. There was an expectation that in 2023, this year, that things might stall a little bit. Macroeconomic conditions aren't necessarily most favorable at the moment in most countries around the world, particularly in Europe and North America. But actually, the industries that are benefiting from a lot of private mobile networks is actually military, energy, utilities, oil and gas, mining. And actually, these are the kind of industries that have actually seen more investment and more favorable macroeconomic conditions over the last 2 or 3 years. So actually, we're not really seeing that slowdown as we might expect. Manufacturing is of course more sensitive, I think, particularly those with kind of consumer goods and looking at the kind of economic situation worldwide. But still, a lot of the networks and the use cases on top of that promote efficiencies and cost savings for these kind of companies. So it's not necessarily an investment that will get that will fall down the pecking order, as it can help to increase savings as well. So we are seeing that growth across deployments and revenue as well, but it's still quite a small market. That's just to highlight. 2.5 billion is the actual global capex of mobile networks is around about 30 to 40 billion. So it's still just a kind of tiny fraction of that, but it is growing definitely. Looking at kind of more of a worldwide view now, you can see that there are 3 kind of main regions which are really dominating proceedings at the moment. North America is the largest in terms of deployments. North America has access to CBRS spectrum, which means that enterprises can access mobile network connectivity more easily than other countries without that. North America is a large country, and lots of the IT infrastructure and tech vendors are located in the US, and these are the ones that are deploying a lot of the sites as well. So North America is certainly one of the largest, and it has some very large networks as well, particularly in critical communications, like AT&T's FirstNet, for instance, which is a very large private mobile network over in the US. Asia as well is an interesting market. There's certainly Japan and South Korea have been growing a lot recently. China is a huge part of that, particularly for kind of virtual and hybrid networks utilizing the public network. The China market is actually very, very good on that, and they're far ahead of the world in some cases, but also the dedicated markets in China as well. Western Europe is, there is a lot of customers involved in that. Generally, I would say Western Europe is slightly more hesitant than some other, the US and some other markets in Asia. There's lots of people trialing the network. Germany is actually the biggest country within Western Europe. We've seen a 5G auction for enterprises in Germany, and we see, of course, a lot of manufacturing, particularly automotive manufacturing in Germany, trialing out these technologies and what they can do with it in those factories. The UK, where I'm based and where CCS is based, is second as well. So the UK is a large market within Western Europe, as well as Northern Europe, countries like Finland and Sweden, where Nokia and Ericsson's home markets are as well. Some other regions around the world, they are a bit smaller. Generally, they're focused on natural resource extraction sites, so things like oil and gas sites or mining or some smart ports and maritime. A lot of these regions have a lot of those. So that's where the majority of networks lie there. Just a little bit more on spectrum, and this is a chart from the GSA private network report. We do see a strong positive correlation between those countries that have kind of opened the radio frequency spectrum for enterprises to acquire directly. So you can see there, those countries in green are those countries that have dedicated spectrum where the companies and organizations can acquire that directly without the need for a mobile network operator. So there definitely is a strong positive correlation there. There are some markets like India and Poland and Brazil which are kind of considering dedicating spectrum to industry, and we do see that once a country does go to make that move, that does increase the number of private mobile networks in that market, I would say. I would say harmonious spectrum policy as well is better for organizations in multiple locations. So as I mentioned, the US is a large country, and having sites around the US it can all work seamlessly on the CBRS spectrum. But when you come to Europe, and there are enterprises with multiple sites across Europe, perhaps in some different countries, maybe one in Germany, one in the US, one in France, for instance, it's actually a little bit difficult in terms of regulation. Each of those countries operates on a different kind of spectrum for private mobile networks. So that does cause a bit of a headache. You can't just kind of have a blueprint for one factory and move it to another in another country. Everything would have to change slightly. So that is a little bit of the reason why Western Europe is perhaps lagging a little bit behind some other countries, just because that spectrum policy is different and slightly more fragmented than some other countries around the world. But there are efforts to look at that. The European Commission and a couple of associations are looking at making that slightly more harmonious and easing that process for a lot of companies around the world. So next is just looking at kind of 4G and 5G. I've already mentioned that 4G is used in the majority of deployments at the moment. We do see 5G, particularly from last year, I would say, starting to increase its adoption. It's about 30% now of rollouts are based on 5G. A lot of it's still 5G non-standalone. There is some standalone there as well, though. In terms of the actual spectrum used, C-band spectrum in the US is a popular, as we mentioned, about CBRS, but 3.5 to 3.7 is kind of the mid-band frequency that is most popular for 5G around the world. Millimeter wave spectrum, so that's kind of what 5G is kind of all about, getting that really fast speeds. Generally, that's kind of only used in a handful of deployments. It's not really being used much in many industrial situations, although lots of countries have auctioned it and enterprises are able to access that quite easily, but they are still not used too much. Open RAN as well, there's talks of that within kind of telecoms industry. I would say we don't really see many private networks dealing with Open RAN at the moment. We're still quite early in the adoption phase. We've got a couple of trials and proof of concepts, but generally it might be a little bit of a stretch for enterprises to engage with that kind of level of network granularity. So the next slide is showing about the different industries, and we've spoken about this today a little bit already, but looking at kind of the different adoption by vertical, and every vertical is very different, I would say, from the kind of research in this area. The verticals at the forefront of the market at the moment are typically those that are kind of very large scale, have rural outdoor environments, particularly things like mission critical communication, I think was mentioned on the kind of panel earlier. So these are the kind of industries which make up the largest number at the moment, and a lot of these are based on kind of 4G. We start to see a lot of things like warehouses and smart ports more recently. Power utilities and smart grids as well are growing in number. So there are a large number of applications in those industries, and it's generally where those industries need wireless connectivity beyond the point where Wi-Fi or something else would comfortably cope, is where we're seeing the most activity at the moment. But over time, particularly this year and going into next year, we are seeing growing diversity of sectors utilizing private mobile networks. There are some examples now of smart buildings and venues, particularly some stadiums in the US using private networks, both for the kind of media and the broadcasting, but also for the kind of fan experience in the zone as well, and some neutral hosts, things like that going on. Healthcare, we've spoken about a bit today, and some of the applications there you can see for private mobile networks are quite obvious, being able to connect up certain machineries, and but it is a very difficult radio frequency environment within healthcare. Smart cities as well is quite a common use case, but agriculture is one that I quite like. I think there's a lot of need for precision agriculture in terms of like hyperlocal monitoring, agricultural drones, but these are need connectivity and strong rural connectivity. So 5G is going to be a part of that for sure, and lots of these applications rely on these new 5G speeds to be able to do some of these new uses and applications, and we're starting to see that happen now. And perhaps I guess the takeaway point really is that almost every vertical sector kind of offers some potential opportunity for private mobile network adoption. So this is a survey we did, surveying kind of telcos about their 5G strategies and services within private networks. Within that, we kind of asked about private mobile network offers, and specifically what applications they felt were driving those enterprise customers to adoption. And we can see that that top one there is no great surprise. I guess that the mobility of 5G was that kind of leading driver, particularly for large scale sites. But I think importantly, IoT sensors there is third, but also data security, as we've just had that panel talking about today. And the data security of private mobile networking is quite a primary value. Actually, it came second in that list. A lot of organizations wanting to digitally transform their process and become more efficient in that way. And those require a lot of data-driven strategies. So having a private mobile network gives that extra level of data security as well. And as they evolve, we'll see these private networks grow to see a broader range of critical applications. We've seen things there like video analytics and video cameras and that kind of thing, AGVs and robotic manufacturing, worker health and safety is a big part of a lot of private mobile network uses today, and of course AI and some of that machine learning applications. Having 5G and potentially 6G going forward will help to enable some of these really quite data heavy processes. So in terms of the kind of companies involved within private mobile networks, it's a very complex ecosystem, and there's lots of logos on your screen at the moment, but these are just examples. This is not even an exhaustive list of all the market players in any category. So there are over 50 vendors involved in the supply of equipment, solutions, and services, and that list is continuing to grow. And it makes a bit of a complex and quite confusing value chain for enterprise customers to grapple with. On one hand, we've seen situations where a private network involves an operator, a cloud provider, a RAN equipment supplier, a core software provider, and a systems integrator. And that's before we even start to get to things like devices or start integrating the network with already existing IT networks. So it can be very, very complex for enterprises to set up these networking. So because of that, I guess we've seen a great deal of partnering between these different elements of the value chain within this ecosystem. We've seen a move towards more pre-integrated solutions, kind of private 5G in a box, for instance, or 5G as a service models, where a lot of the services are kind of managed by that overarching vendor, whether that's a systems integrator or an equipment supplier. Nokia are increasingly kind of going direct to customers. That's a big part of their rebrand, to be seen as kind of an IT player as well. And of course, the operators themselves. We've seen some success stories there where the operators really work as the managed solution provider to do that. So yeah, we are seeing it's a very dynamic ecosystem. There's already been some quite high profile acquisitions as well, and hyperscalers are getting more and more involved. So yeah, that's kind of the takeaway from that slide. So just to address some of the challenges that we're seeing at the moment, we see that private networks are still really in those comparatively early phases, and that's really characterized by that diversity and fragmentation. Market critical mass is still a bit of a way off yet, and it's kind of driven by 5G really and the network performance characteristics that support. We think it will really evolve from a small number of kind of large scale projects where it is now, which are very, very customized, require a lot of resource to figure out what the use cases are and how best to set everything up. We think there will be an inflection point where that will grow to a large number of small and medium enterprises, where that will make doing that much easier. And we're seeing that with some of the product portfolios evolving. I've already talked about some of those kind of pre-integrated solutions from multiple suppliers. The service models evolving as well, those network as a service models. And that's important. Another thing is that as telecoms vendors, we do see that 5G and get excited about it, but industry just sees 5G as another part of that overall IT infrastructure for Industry 4.0. So we should definitely focus on the use cases and what they can enable from that as well. And lastly, just some of the ecosystem challenges. So not all the devices work out the box. Some of the the industries are lobbying for kind of a campus-ready standard for IoT devices. SIM authorization is complex as well. A lot of enterprises are used to dealing with Wi-Fi and fiber, not necessarily 5G and authorizing SIMs and that kind of thing. So that can make kind of private 5G management a little bit tricky as well. So yeah, enterprises aren't necessarily used to dealing with 5G and that kind of thing as well. So last slide now before I hand over to see if we've got any questions or on to the next session. So this is finally the forecast for the picture here. So there is certainly potential in this market. We've spoken about how it's quite small at the moment, but with our forecast analysis, we consider the potential universe of enterprise sites across the globe. Many of those won't necessarily need a private mobile network, so that's the next level of the box, the total addressable market. But still, that's around kind of 2.7 million sites today and 3.5 million sites in a few years' time. So that's really our total addressable market and the level we can get to. So we're expecting it to grow to about from 4,700 to 42,000 within a 4 or 5 year period. But really, it's only just scratching the surface, and that's important to note. Really, I think that there are a lot of challenges. Adoption will be slow, and this is really a long game. Lots of this is going to develop over the next 5, maybe 10 years, and even beyond that as well. So this is really a play for the future, and there's lots more kind of caveats beyond that as well. So that's the time, I think. That's all me. If you do have any further questions about what you've seen in the presentation today, please feel free to get in touch. Unless we've got any questions, Nasia?
No questions from the audience. And that was a very compelling and I would say quite analytical view that you've given us, obviously being an analyst and everything. So I will steal a minute and say, if you were to, because you said it's a long game, right?
Yeah.
And it's not only a long game, it's also a very expensive game. So what would your advice would be for the folks considering getting into private networks?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly try and think about the use cases and what you want to enable, rather than start at the connectivity pillar and what you can do with 5G. Think about what you want to achieve, and 5G might just be part of that story. It's not necessarily 5G versus Wi-Fi. Perhaps the best way to do it is Wi-Fi or cable or some other way. 5G is not necessarily always the answer. So try and think about that kind of end goal of what you want to achieve, what the use cases are, and then work with some kind of vendor to understand how to get to that. And private 5G might be the answer, but it's not always the answer, I would say. So yeah, we tend to focus too much on the connectivity, but we should try and focus more on the use cases and what that can enable.
Oh, that's very good, Luke. And it echoes a lot of what we've been discussing throughout the day. And that's the need for a really robust and looking in detail on the business case. Start with a business case that will unravel everything else that comes throughout, either being 5G, private networks, or any IoT solutions. And with that, I would really like to thank you, Luke. It's been fantastic to have you with us, and great insights and information.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, and I look forward to the rest of the sessions throughout the day. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Luke.
Cheers.